first question is submitted by Steve Bryden.
I'm a local person, and where I'm coming from on the question is that when I was younger, I used to work on a lot of farms in the area, not on beef and dairy farms, but on olericulture, vegetable farms, wheat farms, organic farms, oat farms, stuff like that. And the jobs that I did 20 or 30 years ago, if I tried to get them now, I'm a bit old, but I'd still try. But if I tried to get them now, they're not there anymore. They've either been taken up by machinery, or they're just the amount of farming in Dorset has changed within 30 years to be even heavier towards like the beef and dairy and industry. But with the question is, given that even if all fossil fuel production ceased today, food emissions alone would still push the global temperatures above 2% increase at the higher end of the Paris Agreement targets, and considering that agricultural food production accounts for a third of all greenhouse gas emissions, it would make sense for Dorset Council to prioritise this crucial aspect of the climate crisis. This is acknowledged in the Dorset Council's Food and Drink Technical Paper. The largest contribution to food-based emissions comes from the meat and dairy production industry. Dorset itself has seen a massive growth in the livestock and dairy industry over the last century, which has led to a sustained loss of natural biodiversity in this area. Species locally have been depleted by 19% since 1970 alone, with a loss of 400 species to extinction. With 65% of Dorset farmland used for animal husbandry and only 11.5% for olericulture and vegetable production, there is room for a more balanced and sustainable local food system. Recent analysis has shown that agricultural emissions could be cut by 75% with a shift to a more plant-based diet. The IPCC has stressed that our food system should be transitioning from being a source of emissions to one that acts as a carbon sink. These are things that can be enacted at a local level that have a significant national impact. Cities around Europe, such as Amsterdam and Edinburgh, have successfully endorsed the plant-based treaty and implemented impactful local changes, such as increasing plant-based catering options in public institutions and schools. This includes Earth Days, where 100% plant-based menus are served. Will Dorset Council endorse the plant-based treaty and join a growing global movement towards a positive environmental change? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll respond to your question after the next two because they're on a similar topic. So can I now ask, next one is submitted by Sheila Biddlecombe. She isn't here, but Alex Harmon is going to read her question.
Good evening. So Sheila's question is as follows. Recognising the evidence that plant-based diets are better for both health and the environment, will the Council show leadership on this critical issue by taking the opportunity to lead by example and support a shift towards healthier plant-based diets by endorsing the Plant-Based Treaty? So endorsing the Plant-Based Treaty means expressing support calling for national governments to negotiate a global plant-based treaty as a companion to the Paris Agreement, focusing on a transition to a plant-based food system in order to tackle the climate crisis. Combined with implementing local action within the Council's authority, such as addressing internal catering menus, public education campaigns, and influencing positive change in institutions such as schools. Many UK councils have already taken the step to support this. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We'll now move on to the third question, which is submitted by Sandra Hood, and hopefully she is now online.
Thank you. Can everybody see and hear me?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask this question. And just as Stephen gave a little preamble, I just want to say I'm a retired NHS dietitian, and I was raised on a dairy farm, so I've got quite a lot of background in those two issues. But an analysis by the Office of Health Economics demonstrates that plant-based diets could save the NHS 6.7 billion annually, with 2.1 million fewer cases of disease. No other intervention can deliver such significant health advantages alongside cost savings and environmental benefits. Local councils are in a strong position to introduce plant-based initiatives and deliver public education. Cities like Edinburgh and Amsterdam have endorsed the plant-based treaty and developed comprehensive plant-based food strategies. Implementations such as public awareness campaigns, community cooking classes, and partnerships with local businesses have been implemented by other councils to make plant-based eating more accessible, appealing, and convenient for our residents. Given these compelling health and economic benefits, will Dorset Council endorse the plant-based treaty and take steps to normalise plant-based foods and encourage their consumption? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Now, Councillor Ireland will respond to all those three questions.
Thank you for your questions. Councillor Ireland, Nick Ireland, representing Crossways Ward. I'm going to try to answer all three questions in one response because they are very similar. And you will get a written version individually afterwards. So I'm afraid it's quite long, but here we go. Our communities will be eating meat and dairy well beyond 2050. And livestock farming will continue to be an important part of Dorset's economy and culture in Dorset well beyond 2050 as well. But for that very reason, tackling the environmental impact of food and livestock in particular is essential. And a part of that will require greater understanding, availability and affordability of lower emission foods to help us adopt more sustainable diets. Do nothing and everyone go vegan are both incorrect and polarizing approaches, but they're not the only options. And that is not just my view, that's the opinion of the National Climate Change Committee and also the Food Strategy Independent Review, amongst others, whose analyses can carefully consider these issues alongside food security, the impacts on farm businesses, affordability, and food imports. I want to particularly emphasise 4 key things. Firstly, unlike cities, we can't just focus on what we buy, but also how it's produced. Our farming businesses are at the front line of climate change, both for cutting emissions and climate resilience threats to other food systems. That's a source of anxiety amongst farmers who often feel vilified, but we can't achieve net zero without them. It presents both risks and opportunities to our farming businesses, layered on top of other worries around subsidies, tax, and trade. That's why they need proper support, incentives, and revenue streams in place to help them diversify. Cities without agricultural sectors may be able to ignore this, risk antagonizing farmers and focus just on consumers, but we cannot. We have to be clear that a climate transition for farmers is a must and that farming is a key opportunity area for green rural economies. Secondly, whilst there is a need to increase how much plant-based food we all eat, cutting food emissions is a more complex challenge than just shifting to plant-based diets. We also need to shift what meat is bought, given the considerable variation in emissions amongst meat and where it's produced. And we also need to ensure farmers are supported to make changes on livestock feed and additives, breeding practices, and grazing and waste management. These won't be sufficient in themselves, but they do matter. Thirdly, diet isn't just important for reducing emissions, but for drawing more carbon down by nature. By doing that, we'll need to be very carefully targeted to ensure that not only we maintain, but increase domestic food security and protect our best agricultural land, particularly in the context of food security threats to agriculture from climate impacts themselves. That's why things like the land use framework and the local nature recovery strategy are so important. They'll help ensure that this is carefully managed and planned. Fourth, there are opportunities and risks both for health and the cost of living. Eating more plant-based foods could support healthier and more nutritionally balanced diets, but it also could be negative in some cases, which is why information and guidance on nutrition and meal planning around plant whole foods are so important. Improving health would involve eating more plants, not fake meat, but we must recognise how costs and convenience will influence people's choices. Just calling for more plant-based food isn't enough without measures to ensure that they're more accessible and more affordable, that people have the knowledge and skills to ensure good nutrition, and that we don't worsen cost of living pressures, particularly in a context where the impacts of climate change might itself add inflationary pressures to food bills. For all these reasons, and to be clear, for all that we agree lower emission diets are important, we don't currently believe that the treaty nor a simple call for plant-based diets is necessarily the right approach at this point. As I said at the beginning, this doesn't mean that doing nothing is an option. Far from it. Dorset Council has rightly retained its county farmers estates, which could drive our influence. We have strengthened our engagement over this last year with a wider agricultural sector whilst drafting the local nature recovery strategy. And we also offer plant-based alternatives in our catering facilities and our school menus. And we're creating a public sector sustainable procurement toolkit to go further. That's a good foundation for action. But what's really needed is much bigger than a campaign. It requires strategic changes to the systems for supporting resilient and diversified farm businesses, steering carefully targeted land use change, and enabling informed, affordable, and healthy choices by consumers. So that's the answer to the question. The short answer is no, we're not planning to endorse it anytime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for submitting your questions.